Snowball, A Christmas Dilemma, written and narrated by Ian White. Once upon a time, on a particularly cold and wintry Christmas Eve day, to be more precise, Santa Claus decided, pretty much on the spur of the moment, to take a nap. And why indeed should he not? After all, he'd been up since the crack of dawn and had a long and very busy night ahead of him. And so, mind made up, that's exactly what he did. He stretched out on the living room couch and in no time at all was fast asleep, and things were fine. Things were just Jim Dandy, thank you very much. That is to say, until all at once. "2 o'clock at the stroke. Santa awoke from an afternoon nap he'd been taking. It was a nap which begun at 1:45, but at 2 he was rudely awakened. Tip-tap, 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 tip-tap. There was a sound from the back, like the sound of a tap dripping its drips in a basin. "There's something," said he, "in my house running free, unless I am badly mistaken." Tip-tap, 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 tip-tap. The sound was incessant, not at all pleasant, if one judged by the face he was making. "It's a mouse," Santa wheezed, "and it's been into my cheese, or whatever is left of the bacon." But it wasn't a mouse. He had no mice in the house, and it wasn't the cheese that was taken. Though something had crept through his house whilst he slept, something that likely he'd never suspect. For mine's a tale with a twist in the making. Santa's hat was missing, and there could be no mistaking that. It was if it upped and walked away from the place he'd left it at. He'd left it sitting on the mantel, and he was so sure of that. But there was no doubt, no need to shout, no need to, spread it all about. The plain and simple truth it was, his hat had disappeared. Now, of course, it had hit ups and downs before, many, many times before. Had even, dare I say it, blown his stack before. But never at this time of year, and never quite like this. "Where's my hat?" he thundered, and to no one in particular. "Now, I like jokes," said he, "like most any folks I do suppose, but this is getting quite ridiculous." Then he tore that cottage upside down. He looked most everywhere. For you see, he was to ride his sleigh that night, and now, well, by golly, he had no hat to wear. Oh, he looked in every cranny, and he looked in every nook, inside the grand piano, and behind all kinds of books, underneath the Chesterfield, with his nose down to the floor, and he looked in every cupboard, and behind most every door. But his hat, Santa's hat, was nowhere. It was nowhere to be seen, and he was becoming rather testy, if you know just what I mean. What a strange how do you do. Now what on earth was he to do without his favourite toque? You know the one, red like candy apples, and went so nicely with his suit, and kept his ears so toasty warm on those cold and wintry nights. Riding through those winter storms, he'd had his hat to keep him warm on those cold and wintry nights. But now it had gone missing, and quite frankly, it was driving him insane. Some Christmas gift! And he'd wondered if he'd ever see that hat again. "I know," said he, "I know I left it right there, sitting on that mantel." And he said it just like that. But be that as it may, at the end of the day, and with what was left of his good nature slip-sliding away, Just that one plain and simple truth remained. His hat had disappeared. There was nothing to do but to try and make do without it, for what was the sense of him sitting there, pulling long faces and stewing about it? He'd looked through that place till he was blue in the face, and the hat was not there. So he'd load up his sleigh, call it a day, put the whole thing behind him, and get going without it. But at that very same moment, the clocks on the wall, the one in the kitchen and the one in the hall, sounded together their bells and their chimes. Bong, 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 bong. They're gone on and gone on. 6 and then 7, then 8 and then 9 o'clock. Oh, my goodness, where had the time gone? And he'd known in that instant he'd left it too long. His sleigh, not to mention his reindeer, left standing in place, as was now Santa himself, still in his pajamas, and with egg on his face. For tomorrow was Christmas, after all's done and said, and there were boys and girls everywhere, asleep in their beds, dreaming their dreams of the morning to come. And who did they trust? Why, Santa, of course. Every last one. Now how would it do if they'd awakened to nothing, with not even a bauble or two in their stocking? Them standing there, blinking back tears from their eyes. Oh, it's too hard to imagine, but we can if we try. And all because Santa's red hat had gone missing. Not a chance, thundered he. That was his voice from the kitchen. I shall finish my run, and by golly, I shall finish on time, with or without that red hat I can't find. Then he came to his feet with a newfound resolve, happy and jolly, like the Santa of old, called for his reindeer and was ready to go. But it was then that he'd seen them, with not a square inch between them, pit-patting their way across the cold Arctic snow. Footprints. Hundreds of footprints, and they led to his shed in the garden. That's where they all led. They ran down his walkway, went under the fence, then down to his woodshed. That's where they all went. Well, now, Santa came down from his sleigh like a rocket. One would have thought 2 giant crackers gone off in his pocket. He hitched up his trousers, climbed over the fence, then down to the woodshed. Thwack, 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 thwack. That's where Santa Claus went. The first thing he noticed, I mean to say, the very first thing he noticed, the door was ajar. No, not like a jar you might find in your kitchen, but was just open, this far, and those footprints, they'd ended at that very same spot. So something was in there, someone or something, though goodness knows what. And so ever so slowly he just sort of nudged open the door. It went creak on its hinges, then it opened some more, ever so slowly, then into the dim, that big roly-poly just sort of sidled on in. And the winter winds howled, and the timbers they cracked. Now was this then a warning? Should he turn and go back? Had he bitten off more than he could possibly chew? Oh, how he longed for the answers. How he wished that he knew. Though at first he saw nothing. He saw nothing at all except for the shadows that danced on the wall to the light of his lantern he swung back and forth. Just those shadows, long-legged shadows, but nothing much more. But then all of a sudden, straight out of the blue, when the least he'd expected, it came into view. He lifted his lantern, and then he did see that elusive red hat, just as plain as can be. The very same hat he'd been hunting all day, it was there on his woodstack, larger than life, as if ruling the roost from the place that it lay. Well, Santa just stood there, him hardly believing. I mean to say, it had been there all the time, on the top of his woodstack, halfway up to the ceiling. He could have been hunting his house till the cows had come home, and he'd never had found it. For it was there on his woodstack, and was there all alone. But how did it get there? Now there was the question. Oh, there were all kinds of questions, but that was the best one. How did it get from his house all the way down to the shed? The game is afoot. Now you may laugh if you wish, but that's what Santa Claus said. Someone said he is still somewhere about, for footprints came in, but none have gone out. It was a fine, fine kettle of fish he now found himself in. Should he go? Should he stay? And if it's to stay, then where to begin? The thing was he needed to know, but there was no time to spare for questions, unanswered questions that hung in the air. Who was the rascal? What was his game? Was he mean? Was he nasty? Was he slightly insane? Where was he hiding? In what dark, dingy place? No wonder that frustrated look on his face. No wonder he stood there, his head in a spin, a fine kettle of fish. A colossal humdinger he now found himself in. And to make matters worse, just to add to his pain, the clocks, the ones at the cottage, were back at it again. Even from here he could hear them quite clearly, but now he listened, and he listened intently to the message they sent. If he didn't leave now, it could cost him most dearly. Yes, the game was afoot, whatever that meant, and had known in that instant he must give up the ghost, get back to the matters that matter the most, to his sleigh, to his reindeer, then full speed ahead. For tomorrow was Christmas. The very next morning come the Grinch or Godzilla. After all's done and said, and so neath a sky that is studded with diamonds and spreads out as far as a body can see, we now turn to the crux, to the heart of my story, to its meat and potatoes. Go away. For at that very next moment, and as if by design, as if had been waiting for its moment to shine, resolute and courageous though, somewhat frightened perhaps, the darndest thing happened. For a kitten, a tiny white kitten, tumbled out from his hat. Who would have believed it? But then how could have anyone known that such a poor helpless creature, distraught and alone, had been struggling through snowdrifts and icy cold storms, but then somehow was to find Santa's cottage, creep in to get warm? The hat? The hat on the mantel, the first thing it saw, and Santa was sleeping, remember? Need I say more? Without hesitation he swept it away. Call it sheer desperation. What more can I say? Just a poor helpless kitten that had not even a name. Not even a name, that could not even remember the place where it came from, the place whence it came. And of its dreams most of all, of days in the sun, they were all but forgotten. Just a poor helpless kitten in need of someone. Now the day had been long full of surprises, sad tangles of all sorts and sizes. It was a day one would have thought he'd just sooner forget, that would have plagued him forever and ever. And yet Santa rejoiced in that treasure he'd found. Why, his face filled with joy as he ever so gently reached out towards him, then lifted him down. "Snowball," he whispered, his eyes shining brightly. "The name I shall call you, it suits you, describes you so nicely." And that little white puffball, why, he just snuggled on in. For at last he had found him a someone who was in need just like him. And now Snowball plays with the reindeer their games, shares in their secrets, knows all their names, and he travels with Santa most every place that he goes. But as for the place where it came from, to this very same day, to this very same moment, nobody knows. Although perhaps in some strange and mysterious way that is beyond all understanding, who amongst us can say? Perhaps it was fated, was meant to come true, like a present to Santa. A Christmas time present from you, and from you, and from you, and from you. And so I say, that you say, Merry Christmas, Santa, from all of us kids.